Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. In this video I'm going to be making a card with a night scene with distress ink blending. Hope you enjoy! So I really love the effect that you get with torn paper. So I thought it would be fun to tear all four edges of this paper to use on the outside of my card. So I started with a piece of paper that's bigger than what I want my finished card to be, which will be 5 by 7 inches. And I'm just making sure to tear on the same side so that the rough edge is always facing upwards. And I have a piece of paper that's 5 by 7 just so that I can see if it's the right size, and I'm just going to tear a little bit more so it's smaller so that I'll have a nice white border around the outside. And the great thing about tearing it is that you can always fix areas that you're not quite happy with. So the first thing I did on my moonlit sky was to stamp my moon from Lavinia Stamps. And I put this in the top right hand corner. And I've discovered if you stamp it once and then rotate it slightly and line it up again, with your second generation stamping, it adds so much more detail to the moon, as you can see here. And I'm just going to stamp it again on a bit of post-it note paper. This is the full stick post-it note paper. And then I can cut this out for a mask. So I'll just cover my mask over the moon so it doesn't get any ink on it. And then I can start using my distress inks. So I started with quite a bright color around the moon. This is Peacock Feathers Distress Ink. And I put that along the top, around the edges, and just very lightly on the bottom, because I knew that I was going to put some mountains on this scene, and I want to use a nice lighter color for the mountains. Next, I added some blue onto this scene. So this is Salty Ocean Distress Ink. And I'm going to blend this mostly on the left-hand side of the sky. And again, I'm being careful not to pull it down too far. So I'm kind of using my moon as my indicator on how low the ink should go. And I started off quite lightly here, but I can always make it darker later on. Then I added some Chip Sapphire Distress Ink, which is a lovely deep blue, and I put this along the top, especially on that left-hand side. Now you can quite clearly see the Chip Sapphire and the line between that and the Salty Ocean. So once I'm finished adding the Chip Sapphire, I'm going to go back and darken that Salty Ocean so that they blend well together. And the great thing about distress inks is you can put them on lightly, or you can keep adding more to get a richer, darker color. Next, I used one of the masks from Lavinia Stamps. This is a mountain one, and lined it up where I wanted it to be. And the great thing about using these sorts of masks is you can always turn it upside down if your mountains are in the wrong place. So using some shaded lilac distress ink, I went over where I want my mountains to go. Now the top of the mountains aren't very visible yet, especially because of that Salty Ocean distress ink in the sky, but I'm going to highlight them more later on in the video, as you'll see. I love this color of purple, it's quite beautiful, but you do need to apply a few layers until it becomes dark enough to make this color that's on the mountains here. So I'm just going to keep adding that shaded lilac along the top there, and then I'm gradually adding less pressure as I move down so that the color fades into the white that's at the bottom of the card. Once I'm happy with that, I can move on to adding my next mask. So I'm going to use the one that looks like smaller hills and line it up at the bottom here. So there's still a good 1.5 inches at the bottom. And I'm going to use that chipped sapphire that we used at the top of the card. And I'm going to use a lot of pressure to get a really dark chipped sapphire along these hills. And then again, I'm going to fade that out so the bottom is a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to use my last mask, which is the one that's almost straight, and line it up at the bottom here. And then I'll use some black soot distress ink. And this will be where my animal is standing. And I used a lighter pressure on this, so it's more like a gray really, rather than a pure black. Now when I remove this mask, I did notice that there's a little bit too much white underneath that chipped sapphire where the hills are, so I'm just going to add a little bit more of that until I'm happy with that. And while I've got that black soot out, I'm just going to add it around the edges, especially around the top. And then I thought it might be good to add some over the moon as well. So I removed the mask here and just added a light pressure of distress black soot over that moon just to help it look less white. And I love how when you rip the paper, it really shows up the distress ink on the edges. Next, I'm going to add Oakley from Lavinia Stamps, and I'm going to stamp him with some acorn ink. I'm just going to put him on the left-hand side so he's looking up at the moon here. And he's quite a large stamp, so I'm going to make sure there's lots of ink on it and hold it down for a few seconds to make sure I get a good impression. And usually I would use black ink like Nocturne to stamp these silhouette images. But I found that on this night sky, using the acorn ink, it really helps to put the emphasis on this moose, on Oakley. So I really like how this turned out. And then I'm going to use that same mountain stencil and add some more detail, but I made sure that Oakley was completely dry first. And using a bit of Brilliance ink, I'm just going to put it on my craft mat. That way my ink pad doesn't get dirty. And use a bit of kitchen roll or paper towel. Pick up the ink and lightly dab it where the tops of the mountains are. So you get this nice snow effect. And I tried doing this before stamping Oakley, but because this is a pigment ink, it's best to do it as a last step. Otherwise, it'll show through the acorn ink, which we don't want. And it's a nice effect, but it's not quite enough there. So I did use a white pen as well. So this is actually a Posca pen, but it's quite a thin one, and it's good for drawing a thin white line. And just adding a bit more snow on the top of those mountains. And I'm also going to use it to add some stars in the sky. So I drew my stars on by hand, just doing little dots here and there. But there are some star stamps from Lavinia Stamps that you could always use if you prefer. But because this is quite a small sky, I thought just drawing them on was perfect. And I did add a couple twinkly ones as well, just to finish off the scene. This pen would also work well if you wanted to add snow, and you could just tap it on your acrylic block. But I just wanted sky full of stars for this card. So to finish off the front of the card, I just thought it needed something along the bottom edge. So with the Tree of Hope, it comes with this tiny little branch, that's the second piece. I'm going to use that tiny piece with some of that acorn ink and stamp it so that it's coming off the edges. So it looks like there's some trees. And I love how you can just stamp this more than once and it joins together to make tree branches. You could also stamp it vertically like I did on the left here, or on an angle like I did at the bottom right, however you prefer. And I also did some tiny little pieces along the bottom underneath where Oakley's feet are too, just to finish it off. And it's good if you have some that are longer and some that are shorter. I think that always works well. So now that I'm happy with my scene, I'm going to put it on a card base that's 5 by 7 inches. And I just used double-sided tape for this. And now you can see how that really pops against the white background. In terms of a sentiment, I used one that says happiness, and this is one of 3 stamps that makes up the 3 blessings set from Lavinia. I'm just going to put that on the bottom right here, and I popped it up with some foam squares. And on the inside of the card, because of all those stars in the sky, I thought it would be good to mimic that on the inside. So I started by stamping birthday wishes. This is from the Heartfelt Verses stamp set. And then I did something which I don't do very often, and that is to use my distressings to stamp with. So I used the same colors from before. This is the shaded lilac, and then the salty ocean, and also the peacock feathers. And I just stamped one of the mini stars. This is stars 1, and it stamps so lightly, it's like a watermark, and it's perfect for the inside of a card where you might want a little pop of color, but not too much. And I think that works really well with the star theme on the outside of the card. So now you can see here the beautiful finished card with that nighttime scene, and then the inside with the birthday wishes. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video inspiring. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!